"Sir, I can't find my mommy," the little girl said. "What the Hell's Angel did next will make you cry." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Ted Big Bear Martin moved through the department store's wide aisles. His heavy boots made soft thuds against the polished floor, creating a rhythm that matched his purposeful stride. At 6'4", with arms covered in colorful tattoos and a beard that would make a lumberjack envious, he cut an imposing figure. Shoppers instinctively moved aside as he passed, some clutching their bags closer, others hurrying their children along. Ted noticed their reactions but kept his face neutral. He was used to it by now. After 20 years in the Hell's Angels, he'd grown accustomed to people's fear. What they didn't know was that he'd been working hard to leave that life behind, focusing instead on his legitimate motorcycle parts business. The meeting with his supplier had gone well. They'd agreed on better prices for chrome parts, which would help keep his shop competitive. Ted allowed himself a small smile hidden beneath his beard. It felt good doing honest business, even if people still looked at him like he might rob the place. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. As he passed the children's section, a young mother quickly steered her toddler away, almost knocking over a display of stuffed animals. Ted pretended not to notice, but his shoulders tensed slightly. He'd seen that look of fear thousands of times before, and it still stung, even though he understood why. The men's department was quieter, with fewer shoppers around. Ted's eyes swept over the racks of clothing, landing on a display of leather jackets. His old one was starting to show its age, and he figured it was time for a replacement. Running his calloused fingers over the smooth leather of a black jacket, he appreciated the quality of the material. A small group of teenage boys nearby were whispering and pointing in his direction. One of them made a joke, trying to sound tough, but their nervous laughter gave them away. Ted ignored them, focusing instead on checking the jacket's size tag. The store's air conditioning hummed softly, mixing with the distant sound of shopping cart wheels and muffled conversations. Ted lifted the jacket from its hanger, holding it up to get a better look at the details. The stitching seemed solid, and the zippers were heavy-duty, important features for someone who spent as much time on a motorcycle as he did. As he turned the jacket around to examine the back, a small voice cut through his concentration. "Sir, my mommy's crying in the bathroom." Ted froze, then slowly looked down. Standing before him was a little girl, maybe 8 years old, with worried brown eyes and 2 braids tied with blue ribbons. Her small hands were clasped together nervously as she looked up at him, and despite her obvious fear, there was a determination in her expression that caught Ted off guard. For a moment, the bustling store seemed to fade away. This child, who couldn't weigh more than 70 pounds soaking wet, had chosen to approach him, the scary-looking biker that everyone else was avoiding. The trust in her eyes, mixed with obvious distress, stirred something protective in Ted's chest. The leather jacket hung forgotten in his hands as he met the little girl's anxious gaze, her words about her crying mother echoing in his mind. Ted carefully set the leather jacket back on its hanger, his movements deliberately slow and gentle. He didn't want to frighten the child who'd trusted him enough to ask for help. With practiced care, he lowered his massive frame until he was at eye level with the little girl. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said softly, his deep voice barely above a whisper. "What's your name?" "Lily," she replied, twisting one of her braids nervously. Ted nodded, keeping his expression open and kind. "I'm Ted. Can you tell me where your mom is?" Lily pointed toward the back of the store. "She's in the bathroom near the shoe section. She thinks I can't hear her crying, but I can." Her bottom lip trembled slightly. Ted felt his heart squeeze. He'd seen plenty of tough situations in his years with the Hell's Angels, but a crying child and her distressed mother hit differently. He glanced around, spotting a female store employee arranging clothes nearby. "Miss?" he called out, his voice making the young woman jump. "Could you help us? This little girl's mother needs assistance in the restroom." The employee took one look at Ted's tattoos and massive frame and shook her head. I'm not authorized to leave my section," she stammered, quickly walking away. Ted sighed heavily, running a hand through his beard. He looked back at Lily, who was watching him with those big, trusting eyes. "How long has your mom been in there?" "A long time," Lily said, shuffling her feet. "Maybe 20 minutes? She told me to wait outside, but—" She trailed off, looking worried. Fighting an internal battle, Ted glanced at the women's restroom sign. He'd never been one to get involved in other people's problems. Life had taught him that minding his own business was usually the safest bet. But something about this situation, about this little girl's faith in asking him for help, wouldn't let him walk away. "All right, Lily," he said, standing up. "Let's go check on your mom. You lead the way, but stay where I can see you." They walked towards the restroom, Lily's small sneakers squeaking on the floor beside Ted's heavy boots. As they approached, Ted could hear muffled sobbing coming from inside. He stopped at the entrance, keeping a respectful distance. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice gentle but clear, "your daughter Lily is worried about you. Is it okay if I sit out here and talk with you for a bit?" The sobbing quieted, replaced by a shaky voice. Who are you?" "Name's Ted," he answered, settling down on the floor next to the restroom door. "Your little girl was brave enough to ask me for help when she saw you were upset." There was a pause, then the sound of quiet weeping resumed. "I'm sorry," the woman's voice cracked. Everything's falling apart. I can't keep doing this alone." "Sometimes talking helps," Ted offered, keeping his voice low and steady. "I'm just a stranger sitting outside a bathroom door, but I'm willing to listen." Another pause, followed by a shuddering breath. "I'm Clara," she said finally, "and I feel like I'm drowning. The bills keep piling up, my ex-husband is threatening to take Lily away, and I just lost my second job. I don't know what to do anymore." Clara's voice trembled as she spoke through the bathroom stall door. "I thought I was doing the right thing, leaving him. She paused, taking a shaky breath. "He used to get so angry, over little things. A dish left in the sink, dinner being 5 minutes late." Ted shifted his weight against the wall, his leather vest creaking. He'd seen enough domestic violence in his time with the Hells Angels to recognize the signs. "You did do the right thing," he said firmly. "Did I?" Clara's voice cracked. "Look at me now. I'm crying in a department store bathroom while my daughter—" She stopped suddenly. "Oh God, Lily, where's Lily?" "She's right here," Ted assured her quickly. "She's sitting on the bench outside, reading a magazine. I can see her from where I am." A small sob of relief escaped Clara. "I'm usually stronger than this, I promise. It's just, today everything hit at once. The landlord raised the rent again. My ex is demanding more visitation rights. And I just got let go from my evening waitressing job because I couldn't find a sitter for Lily last week." Ted listened, his weathered face creased with concern. Through the crack in the stall, he could see Clara's hands twisting a wet tissue. They were workers' hands, with short nails and rough spots from constant washing. "My savings are almost gone," she continued quietly. "I've been looking for better work, but it's hard with my schedule. Lily needs me in the mornings and afternoons. I can't afford after-school care." "Single parenting ain't easy," Ted acknowledged, his deep voice gentle. "Especially when you're starting over. Sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough for this," Clara admitted. "If I'm just failing Lily by trying to do it all alone." Ted reached into his vest pocket, fingers brushing against the small token he'd carried for years. "Let me tell you something," he said. "I've known a lot of tough people in my life, real tough. But strength isn't about never breaking down. It's about getting back up when you do." There was a rustling sound as Clara wiped her eyes. "I don't feel very strong right now." "You're doing better than you think," Ted said firmly. "You got your daughter away from a bad situation. You're working multiple jobs, fighting to give her a better life. That takes real courage." Ted pulled out the silver coin from his pocket, running his thumb over the worn engraving, a guardian angel with spread wings. It had been given to him when he first joined the club, a symbol of brotherhood and protection. "Here," he said, sliding the coin under the stall door. "This is something special from my motorcycle club. It's meant to remind you that you're not alone, even when it feels like you are." Clara picked up the coin, and he heard her soft intake of breath as she examined it. I can't take this. It must mean something to you." "It does," Ted agreed. "And now it means something to you too. A reminder that you're stronger than you know." There was a long moment of silence, broken only by Clara's steadying breaths. When she finally spoke again, her voice was different, still fragile, but with a thread of something new. Something like hope. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the coin tightly. "I didn't expect— most people would have just walked away." Through the crack in the stall, Ted could see Clara's fingers tracing the angel's wings on the coin. And for the first time since he'd heard her crying, her hands were steady. Ted watched as Clara tucked the coin into her pocket and took a few steadying breaths. Her eyes were still red, but she'd regained her composure. She smoothed down her blouse and pushed open the stall door. "Ready to head out?" Ted asked gently. Clara nodded, managing a small smile. "Yes, and thank you again. I should get back to Lily." As they walked out of the restroom area, they found more than just Lily waiting for them. A man in a crisp navy blazer with a silver name tag stood there, his arms crossed. Next to him, Lily looked tiny and frightened, shrinking behind a rack of clothes. "Ma'am," the store manager said, his voice clipped, "we need to discuss your daughter's behavior." Clara's face paled. "What? What's wrong?" "One of our security personnel observed her attempting to remove a stuffed animal from its packaging near the toy section." The manager's eyes narrowed. "When the alarm went off, she dropped it and ran." "No, I didn't steal anything," Lily protested, her voice wobbling. "I just wanted to see if it was soft like my old bear, the one Daddy—" She stopped, lower lip trembling. Clara rushed to her daughter's side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "This must be a misunderstanding. Lily knows better than to steal." "Nevertheless," the manager continued, "store policy requires us to contact the authorities in cases of attempted theft." "Authorities?" Clara's voice cracked. "Over a child looking at a toy? She didn't even leave the store." Ted stepped forward, his massive frame making the manager take an involuntary step back. But when he spoke, his voice was measured and calm. "Mind if I take a look at your security footage?" The manager blinked, clearly thrown off by Ted's unexpected intervention. Well, that's not typically. Because," Ted continued smoothly, "if there's been a misunderstanding, we should clear it up before making any unnecessary calls, especially involving a child." His tone was reasonable, but there was an underlying firmness that made the manager shift uncomfortably. Ted's presence, while not overtly threatening, carried an unmistakable weight. "The footage would show exactly what happened," Ted added. "Might save everyone some time and trouble." Clara watched the exchange, her hand protectively on Lily's shoulder. The child had pressed herself against her mother's side, eyes wide and fearful. The manager glanced between Ted's steady gaze and Clara's worried face. "I suppose We could review the footage first. That seems fair, Ted said, nodding approvingly. And while we're at it, maybe we can talk about how this situation could have been handled differently, starting with approaching a minor without her parent present. The manager's face flushed slightly. I was simply following protocol. Protocol's important, Ted agreed, his voice still calm but carrying authority. So is good judgment. Why don't we step into your office and sort this out? Ms. Rodriguez can come too, of course. Clara felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as Ted took control of the situation. His presence was like a shield, steady and reassuring. She watched as the manager's rigid stance began to soften under Ted's reasonable approach. Very well, the manager conceded. We can review the footage in my office. Please, follow me. The store manager's office felt small and stuffy. Clara perched on the edge of a metal folding chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Lily sat next to her, shoulders hunched, looking smaller than ever. It was just a misunderstanding, Clara explained, her voice trembling slightly. Lily's old teddy bear. Her father destroyed it during one of his episodes. She just wanted to feel if this one was similar. Her eyes darted to Ted, who stood like a sentinel near the door, his presence oddly comforting. The manager, Mr. Peterson, according to his name tag, rewound the security footage on his computer monitor. The grainy video showed Lily carefully touching the stuffed animal, then startling when the security tag caused the alarm to beep. Fear clear on her face, she dropped the toy and moved away quickly. The footage clearly shows she had no intention of stealing, Ted spoke up, his deep voice calm but firm. The child was examining the toy inside the store. There was no attempt to conceal or remove it. Mr. Peterson frowned, tapping his fingers on his desk. Our policy regarding security alerts is very clear. Policy needs to be applied with common sense, Ted interrupted, taking a step forward. His movement was casual, but his size seemed to fill the small office. What we have here is a frightened little girl who made an honest mistake. Clara watched as Mr. Peterson's eyes flickered between Ted's steady gaze and the security footage. She could feel Lily trembling beside her and wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. I've already called the authorities, Mr. Peterson said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. They should be here any... A knock at the office door interrupted him. 2 police officers entered, making the already cramped space feel even more confined. Clara's heart hammered in her chest as she pulled Lily closer. Afternoon, officers, Ted said, stepping forward with an air of authority that made both policemen straighten slightly. I'm Ted Martin. I've been helping sort out this misunderstanding. The older officer nodded. What seems to be the situation? Before Mr. Peterson could speak, Ted gestured to the security monitor. We have footage showing a child looking at a stuffed animal inside the store. Security tag caused an alarm, scared her, and she dropped it. No attempt at theft, just a startled 8-year-old. The younger officer moved closer to watch the footage, while his partner listened to Ted's calm explanation. Clara noticed how Ted's demeanor had shifted. He was still intimidating, but there was a professional courtesy in his tone that seemed to resonate with the officers. Ms. Rodriguez here, Ted continued, nodding toward Clara, has been fully cooperative. Her daughter made an honest mistake, and the video confirms that. The older officer watched the footage replay, then turned to his partner. They exchanged a look before addressing Mr. Peterson. Doesn't appear to be any criminal intent here. No need for formal charges or further investigation. Clara felt tears of relief prick at her eyes. Lily's grip on her arm loosened slightly. We appreciate you following protocol, the younger officer said to Mr. Peterson. But this seems to be a clear case of a misunderstanding. He turned to Clara and Lily with a gentle smile. You folks are free to go. Mr. Peterson's mouth opened as if to protest, but something in Ted's steady gaze made him think better of it. Yes, well, perhaps we can consider this matter closed. Clara stood on shaky legs, keeping Lily close as they prepared to leave the office. The police officers were already heading out, but she couldn't help noticing how they treated Ted with a kind of professional respect she wouldn't have expected. There was clearly more to this man than his intimidating appearance suggested. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Ted walked beside Clara and Lily. Clara's old Honda Civic sat alone at the far end of the lot, its faded blue paint showing years of wear. Lily stayed close to her mother, one small hand wrapped tightly in Clara's. "I can't thank you enough," Clara said, her voice still shaky from the stress of the afternoon. She fumbled with her keys, dropping them once before managing to get a good grip. "Most people would have just walked away." Ted shrugged his broad shoulders, his leather vest creaking with the movement. "Couldn't do that? Not when someone needs help?" He watched as Lily climbed into the back seat, her movements careful and precise, like someone trying very hard to be good. Clara paused before opening her door, her dark eyes meeting Ted's. "Still, what you did in there, the way you handled everything—" She shook her head, amazed. "I was sure they were going to arrest me, use this against me somehow." "The police just needed to see the truth," Ted said simply. He gestured toward the back seat where Lily sat. "Your daughter's a good kid. Anyone could see that." Clara's eyes welled up with tears again, but she quickly wiped them away. "I'm sorry. I'm not usually this emotional. It's just been a really hard few months." Ted nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Keep that coin I gave you. If you ever need help." He pulled out an old receipt from his vest pocket and scribbled down his phone number. "Call me. Anytime." Clara took the paper, holding it like it was something precious. "Thank you, Mr. Martin." "Ted," he corrected gently. Just Ted. After making sure Clara and Lily were safely in their car and on their way, Ted walked across the parking lot toward his motorcycle. The gleaming Harley-Davidson stood apart from the regular vehicles, its chrome pipes and custom paint job catching the late afternoon light. As he approached, memories washed over him like a tide. He ran his hand along the bike's fuel tank, feeling the smooth metal beneath his fingertips. 20 years ago, he'd been a different man, angry, violent, looking for any excuse to prove himself through force. The Hells Angels had given him a home, but it came with a price he was still paying. Ted's fingers traced the worn leather of his seat, remembering nights of violence and revenge that he'd rather forget. Back then, he'd been known as Big Bear, not just for his size, but for his ferocity. How many times had he been the one causing fear instead of alleviating it? Looking at his reflection in the bike's chrome, Ted saw the face that still scared people, the thick beard, the weathered skin, the hard eyes. But today, for the first time in a long while, he'd used his intimidating presence to protect rather than threaten. It felt right, like maybe there was a way to balance the scales for all the wrong he'd done. The guilt sat heavy in his chest as he thought about Clara and Lily. They reminded him of his own sister and niece, before things went bad, before his choices had torn his family apart. The shadow of his past stretched long across the pavement, just like the evening sun, a constant reminder of the man he used to be. Clara's key scraped against the lock of apartment 2B, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. The flickering fluorescent light above made shadows dance across the worn carpet. Lily stayed close, her small backpack clutched tight against her chest. Inside their small apartment, the familiar smell of the lavender air freshener Clara used to mask the building's musty scent welcomed them home. The space was modest. Combined living room and kitchen, 2 tiny bedrooms, and a bathroom that always seemed to have a dripping faucet. But it was theirs. Clara had worked hard to make it feel like home, with colorful throw pillows on the second-hand couch and Lily's artwork proudly displayed on the refrigerator. "Go wash up for dinner, sweetie," Clara said, running her fingers through Lily's dark hair. "I'll heat up the leftover spaghetti." As Lily disappeared down the short hallway, Clara reached into her purse and pulled out the coin Ted had given her. It was heavy in her palm, worn smooth around the edges from years of handling. The engraving caught the light, a skull with wings, the Hell's Angels emblem. It should have scared her, but instead, it made her feel oddly protected. She thought about Ted's gentle words in the store bathroom. "You're doing better than you think." No one had told her that in a long time. Usually all she heard were criticisms, from her ex-husband, from her boss, from herself. But Ted had seen something different in her, something strong. The microwave hummed as it heated their dinner. Clara leaned against the counter, her mind replaying the afternoon's events. The store incident could have gone so badly. If Ted hadn't been there. She shuddered, thinking about how her ex-husband would have used it against her. "Mommy?" Lily appeared in her clean pajamas, her face freshly washed. "Can we read 2 stories tonight?" Clara smiled, pushing away her worried thoughts. "Just 1 tonight, baby. It's getting late." After dinner and stories, Clara tucked Lily into bed, smoothing the unicorn-printed sheets around her small form. "I love you to the moon and back," she whispered, their nightly ritual. "And to all the stars, too," Lily finished, already half asleep. Back in the living room, Clara sank onto the couch, finally allowing herself to fully process the day. Her ex-husband's latest threat echoed in her mind. "One mistake, Clara. That's all I need to take her away." He'd been watching, waiting for her to slip up. Today could have been that mistake. She pulled out her phone, opening the email from his lawyer about the custody hearing. The words blurred together. Legal terms she didn't understand, demands she couldn't meet. How could she fight this? She barely made enough to cover rent and groceries, let alone lawyer fees. Across town, Ted sat in his home office, surrounded by motorcycle parts, catalogs, and invoices. His phone buzzed on the desk. The message was from Marcus Chen, the motorcycle club's longtime lawyer. "Got your message about the single mom situation. Pro bono work isn't usually my thing, but I owe you one. Send her details when you can." Ted stared at the message, the glow of the phone screen illuminating his weathered face. Maybe, just maybe, he could help Clara fight back. The morning sun streamed through Ted's kitchen window as he sipped his black coffee. The newspaper spread out before him. His phone buzzed. Against the wooden table, Marcus Chen's name flashing on the screen. "Big Bear," Marcus's voice was tight with concern. "I've got some bad news about your friend Clara Rodriguez." Ted's grip tightened on his coffee mug. "What's wrong?" "Her ex-husband, James Rodriguez, filed for emergency full custody late last night. He's using yesterday's store incident as evidence." Marcus paused, papers shuffling in the background. "He's painting her as an unfit mother who can't provide proper supervision. Claims she's teaching their daughter to steal." Ted's jaw clenched. The mug made a sharp sound as he set it down. "That's ridiculous. The store didn't even press charges." "Doesn't matter. He's got a fancy lawyer from downtown, and they're pushing hard. They're also bringing up her financial situation, saying she can't provide a stable environment." More papers rustled. "Ted, this isn't good. Without proper legal representation, she could lose her daughter." Ted stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "How fast can you get the paperwork ready?" "I can have everything prepared by this afternoon, but Ted..." Marcus hesitated. This kind of case isn't cheap, even with the friends and family discount. Money's not an issue. Ted was already grabbing his leather jacket from the hook by the door. Send me her ex's file. I want to know everything about this James character. After hanging up, Ted climbed onto his Harley, the engine roaring to life beneath him. The ride to Clara's apartment complex took 20 minutes, each one weighing heavily on his mind. The thought of Clara losing Lily made his stomach turn. The apartment building was quiet this early in the morning. Ted's heavy boots echoed in the stairwell as he climbed to the second floor. He found 2B and knocked, trying to soften his usually intimidating presence. Clara opened the door, still in her pajamas and robe, surprise clear on her face. "Ted, what are you doing here?" "Can I come in?" he asked softly. "We need to talk." Clara's face fell, but she stepped aside. The apartment was small but tidy, with the smell of fresh coffee in the air. Lily's backpack sat by the door, ready for school. "Is Lily here?" Ted asked, remaining standing as Clara sank onto the couch. "She's in her room, getting dressed for school." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "What's wrong?" Ted took a deep breath. "My lawyer called this morning. Your ex-husband filed for emergency custody last night." He watched as all color drained from Clara's face. "He's using yesterday's incident at the store against you." "No," Clara whispered, her hands beginning to shake. "No, he can't. It was just a misunderstanding. Lily didn't even—" Her voice broke. "Hey." Ted knelt in front of her, his large frame somehow less intimidating as he tried to catch her eye. "Listen to me. We're not going to let him win. My lawyer, Marcus Chen, is one of the best family court attorneys in the state. He owes me a favor, and he's willing to take your case." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "I can't afford a lawyer, Ted. I can barely make rent." "You don't have to worry about that," Ted said firmly. "I'm handling it. All you need to focus on is keeping yourself and Lily strong." Clara looked up at him, her eyes wet but fierce. "Why are you doing this? You barely know us." "Because sometimes people deserve a second chance," Ted said. "Sometimes they deserve someone in their corner, fighting for them. Let me be that person for you and Lily." The law office of Chen and Associates occupied a modest building downtown. Clara hesitated at the entrance, her hands fidgeting with her purse strap. Ted's large frame cast a protective shadow beside her. "I can't do this," she whispered, taking a step back. "What kind of mother lets things get this bad?" Ted placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The kind who's trying her best. Come on, Marcus is waiting." The elevator ride to the third floor was silent, except for Clara's shaky breathing. Ted noticed how she kept smoothing her skirt, the same one she'd worn yesterday at the store. It hit him then that this might be her only good outfit. Marcus Chen's office was warm and inviting, with certificates lining the walls and a window view of the city park. The lawyer himself, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, stood to greet them. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Marcus extended his hand. "Please, have a seat." Clara perched on the edge of the leather chair, her back rigid. "It's Ms. Rodriguez now." Marcus nodded, settling behind his desk. "Ted filled me in on the basics. Your ex-husband has filed for emergency custody based on yesterday's incident. But let's talk about your rights." He pulled out a thick folder. "In New Jersey, both parents have equal rights to custody, unless proven otherwise. Your ex-husband will need to demonstrate that you're an unfit parent, which he can't do based on one misunderstanding at a store." Clara's voice was barely audible. "But I can barely make ends meet. The apartment, it's so small, and sometimes I have to leave Lily with neighbors when I work late shifts." "Financial struggles don't make you an unfit parent," Marcus stated firmly. "The court looks at the whole picture, Emotional bonds, stability, the child's preferences. How old is Lily? 8. That's good. At her age, the court will consider her wishes. Marcus leaned forward. Tell me about your ex-husband. Any history of abuse? Clara's hands twisted in her lap. Yes, I have police reports, hospital visits. Ted's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Marcus made notes. That's crucial information. Now about your current situation. Do you have steady employment? I work at the diner, 6 years now. But the hours... Steady employment history. Good. Marcus looked up. Ms. Rodriguez, you have a stronger case than you realize, but we need to act fast. Clara's shoulders slumped. It doesn't matter. I can't afford legal fees. Can barely afford groceries some weeks. Ted cleared his throat. That's already taken care of. Clara turned to him, eyes wide. What? Marcus is handling your case. I'm covering the costs. No. Clara shook her head frantically. No, I can't accept that. It's too much. You don't even know me. I know enough. Ted's voice was gentle but firm. I know you're a good mother who escaped a bad situation. I know you work hard to give your daughter a better life. And I know you deserve a chance to fight for her. But why would you do this? Ted met her gaze steadily. Because everyone deserves someone in their corner. Let me be in yours. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't entirely from despair. She looked between Ted and Marcus, seeing for the first time a glimmer of hope in her desperate situation. Marcus smiled kindly. Shall we get started on your defense strategy? Clara's hands trembled as she poured coffee into a customer's cup. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, evidence of another sleepless night spent reviewing legal documents. The morning rush at Joe's diner kept her moving, but her mind wandered to the stack of paperwork waiting at home. Order up! The cook's voice snapped her back to reality. She grabbed the plates, managing a tired smile for table 6. 3 weeks had passed since that day in Marcus Chen's office, and each day felt heavier than the last. Between double shifts at the diner and preparing for court, she barely had time to breathe. The bell above the door chimed. Ted's massive frame filled the entrance, and relief washed over Clara's face. He'd been stopping by regularly, bringing coffee or sometimes just a kind word. Today, he carried a brown paper bag. Thought you might need lunch, he said, settling at the counter. Marcus mentioned you missed your breakfast meeting. Clara's cheeks flushed. Lily wasn't feeling well this morning. I had to drop her at my neighbor's later than usual. How is she? Better now, just a stomach ache. Clara wiped down the counter, avoiding Ted's concerned gaze. I feel terrible leaving her when she's sick, but I can't miss any more shifts. Ted nodded, understanding in his eyes. He pulled out a container from the bag. Here, real food, not just diner fare. My mother's recipe for chicken soup. Clara's throat tightened at the gesture. These small kindnesses were becoming harder to accept, each one reminding her how much she needed help. Ted, The diner's phone rang, cutting her off. Sally, the other waitress, called out, Clara, it's for you! Clara's heart dropped. Few people knew to call her at work. She picked up the receiver, her hand shaking slightly. Hello? Having fun playing waitress? Her ex-husband's voice slithered through the line. Must be exhausting, pretending you can actually take care of our daughter. Clara's knuckles went white around the phone. Ted straightened, noticing her distress. What do you want, Michael? Just checking in, before the hearing. Thought you should know I've hired Preston and Mitchell. He paused, letting the name of the prestigious law firm sink in. Face it, Clara, you've already lost. A waitress living in a cramped apartment. The judge will take one look at your situation and give me full custody. Clara's vision blurred with tears. You don't even want her. You just want to hurt me. Maybe, but I'll win either way. His laugh was cold. Better start saying goodbye to her now. The line went dead. Clara's legs gave out, and she sank onto a nearby stool. Ted was at her side instantly, one large hand steady on her shoulder. Hey, he said softly. Breathe. He hired Preston and Mitchell, she whispered. They never lose custody cases. Never. Ted's face hardened, but his voice remained gentle. There's always a first time. We've got Marcus, we've got proof of his abuse, and most importantly, we've got the truth on our side. Clara looked up at him, tears spilling over. What if it's not enough? It will be, Ted promised, though a shadow crossed his features. We're going to win this, Clara. Together. But even as he spoke the words, Clara felt the weight of dread settling over them both, heavy and suffocating like storm clouds before a downpour. The neon sign of Jake's bar flickered in the late afternoon sun, casting an eerie red glow across Ted's weathered face. He pushed open the heavy wooden door, the familiar smell of stale beer and cigarettes hitting him as he entered. At the far end of the bar, Ray the Snake Thompson nursed a beer, his leather vest adorned with patches from years of motorcycle club service. Ted made his way over, nodding to the bartender. Snake. Ray looked up, a crooked smile spreading across his face. Big Bear. Been a minute. They clasped hands in a firm shake before Ted settled onto the bar stool next to him. The bartender placed a beer in front of Ted, without being asked. Heard you needed some intel, Ray said, keeping his voice low. About some hotshot lawyer firm? Ted took a slow sip of his beer. Preston and Mitchell. Need to know what kind of dirt they might dig up on Clara's ex. Already got my guys looking into it. Ray pulled out a worn leather notebook. That piece of work has quite a history of... The bar door slammed open, cutting Ray off mid-sentence. Heavy boots thudded against the wooden floor. Ted didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He recognized those footsteps from years ago. Well, a gravelly voice drawled. If it ain't Big Bear Martin, playing social worker these days. Ted turned slowly on his stool. Duke Morrison stood there, his massive frame blocking the afternoon light from the doorway. The rival club's patches on his vest seemed to mock Ted, reminding him of old wounds and bitter feuds. Duke. Ted's voice was flat, controlled. This is a private conversation. Duke's scarred face twisted into a sneer as he walked closer. Heard you're helping some woman with her custody case. Getting soft in your old age? Ray tensed beside Ted, his hand sliding beneath his vest. Ted gave him a subtle shake of the head. My business ain't your concern anymore, Duke. Hasn't been for 5 years. See? That's where you're wrong. Duke leaned against the bar, too close for comfort. Everything you do is my concern, especially when you're working with that lawyer, Marcus Chen. Ted's jaw tightened. How do you know about Marcus? Let's just say I got friends in interesting places. Duke's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. Here's some friendly advice. Drop the custody case. Walk away from the woman and her kid. Or what? Or maybe some interesting stories about your past start floating around. Duke's eyes glittered with malice. Think that nice judge would still listen to your character testimony after hearing about Reno? Or maybe that night in Vegas? Ted's hands clenched into fists under the bar, his knuckles white with tension. The memories Duke referenced were dark ones, buried deep for good reason. You threatening me, Duke? Just giving you a chance to do the smart thing. Duke straightened up, adjusting his vest. Stay out of it, Big Bear, or I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man is vouching for that woman's character. Duke turned and walked out, leaving the threat hanging in the air like smoke. The bar felt colder somehow, the weight of the past pressing down on Ted's shoulders. Ray cleared his throat. "You know he ain't bluffing, Bear." Ted stared at his beer, seeing his reflection in the amber liquid. Everything he'd built, all the work he'd done to leave his past behind, it could all come crashing down. And worse, it could take Clara and Lily down with him. Ted sat in his garage, surrounded by the familiar smell of motor oil and leather. His eyes fixed on an old photograph pinned to the wall, younger version of himself standing proud next to his first Harley. The sight of it made his stomach churn now. Duke's threats echoed in his mind. Reno, Vegas, names of cities that carried dark memories, nights filled with violence and revenge that he'd tried so hard to forget. His hands trembled slightly as he ran them over his beard, remembering the weight of brass knuckles, the crack of bones, the rush of adrenaline that used to fuel him. The motorcycle parts scattered across his workbench blurred as his mind drifted back to that night in Reno. The rival club had crossed a line, hurt one of their own. Ted had led the retaliation, earned his reputation as Big Bear that night. The memory of what he'd done to those men still haunted him. "Damn it," he muttered, pushing away from the workbench. His reflection caught in a dusty mirror, the tattoos on his arms telling stories he wished he could erase. Was he really any different now? Or was he just pretending, wearing respectability like a borrowed jacket that didn't quite fit? The old anger bubbled up inside him, familiar and seductive. It would be so easy to handle Duke the old way. One night, one reminder of why they used to fear Big Bear. His fist clenched involuntarily. But then he thought of Clara's face in that department store bathroom, vulnerable and afraid. Of little Lily's trusting eyes when she'd asked for help. The anger drained away, replaced by something heavier, responsibility. Ted pulled out his phone, staring at it for a long moment before dialing Clara's number. Each ring felt like an eternity. "Ted." Clara's voice was tired, but warm. "Yeah, it's me." He cleared his throat. "Listen, I need to tell you something." "Is everything okay?" There's people trying to stop me from helping with your case. Old enemies." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "They're threatening to dig up my past, use it against us in court." The silence on the other end of the line felt heavy. "But I want you to know," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "I'm not backing down. We're going to fight this, Clara, all the way." He heard her release a shaky breath. "Ted, I can't ask you to risk—" "You're not asking, I'm choosing." His voice carried a tremor, but beneath it was steel. "Whatever they throw at us, we'll handle it. Together." "Together," Clara repeated softly. The word hung between them, a promise and a prayer. "Get some rest," Ted said. "We've got a big fight ahead." As he ended the call, Ted looked again at his reflection. The man staring back wasn't Big Bear from the Hells Angels anymore, but he wasn't exactly sure who he was either. Maybe that was okay. Maybe becoming someone new meant living in that uncertainty for a while. He tucked his phone away and started organizing the scattered parts on his workbench. The old anger was still there, but it felt different now. Controlled, redirected. He would need that strength for what was coming, but this time it would be used to protect, not destroy. The diner's neon sign buzzed softly overhead as Ted held the door open for Clara and Lily. The familiar smell of coffee and grilled burgers wrapped around them like a warm blanket. A bell chimed as they stepped inside, and the waitress, a woman with graying hair and kind eyes, led them to a corner booth. "This place has the best milkshakes in town," Ted said, his gruff voice softening as he watched Lily's eyes widen at the colorful menu. Clara smoothed her daughter's hair, still wearing the carefully pressed blazer from their morning at the courthouse. The weight of the legal papers in her purse felt lighter now. Their lawyer had assured them that filing the counter-motion was a strong first step, but Clara couldn't shake the nervous energy thrumming through her body. "Can I get a chocolate shake, Mom?" Lily asked, bouncing slightly in her seat. "Please?" "Of course, sweetie." Clara managed a small smile, though her hands still trembled slightly as she opened her menu. Ted noticed. He always noticed. "Hey, kid," he said to Lily, "did you know they can make it with extra whipped cream if you ask nice?" Lily's face lit up, and she turned to the approaching waitress with newfound determination. "May I please have a chocolate shake with extra whipped cream?" The waitress winked. "Coming right up, honey." As they ordered their meals, burgers for Ted and Lily, a club sandwich for Clara, Ted watched the tension in Clara's shoulders slowly begin to ease. The morning's legal proceedings had been draining, but here in this simple diner, surrounded by the chatter of other customers and the clink of silverware, things felt almost normal. "The lawyer seemed confident," Ted said, his massive frame making the vinyl booth creak as he shifted. "Said your documentation was solid." Clara nodded, absently stirring her water with a straw. "I just keep thinking about everything that could go wrong. If he brings up the store incident, or if—" "Mom, look!" Lily interrupted, pointing at the massive chocolate shake that had appeared before her. The whipped cream tower wobbled precariously, topped with a bright red cherry. The pure joy on her daughter's face broke through Clara's worry. A genuine laugh escaped her, light and unexpected, as Lily carefully attempted to navigate the mountain of whipped cream with her straw. "Here." Ted reached over with his napkin, gently wiping a spot of chocolate from Lily's chin. The gesture was so natural, so paternal, that it caught Clara off guard. This man, with his tattoos and scarred knuckles, showing such tenderness. Their food arrived, and conversation flowed easier. Lily chatted about her school art project. Ted shared funny stories about fixing motorcycles, and Clara found herself relaxing into the moment. The legal battle ahead still loomed, but right now, in this worn booth with its cracked vinyl seats, she felt safe. "Thank you," she said softly to Ted, while Lily was distracted by her shake. "For everything." Ted ducked his head slightly, unused to gratitude. But as he watched Clara laugh at another of Lily's chocolate-mustached grins, he felt something shift inside him. A warmth he hadn't experienced in years, different from the burning anger or cold determination that had driven him for so long. It was something gentler, something that made him want to protect these moments of simple joy. He allowed himself a small smile, the expression feeling foreign but right on his weathered face. Clara's hands shook as she read the court document. Her ex-husband's latest accusations felt like punches to her stomach. Each word twisted deeper, making it harder to breathe. She sat at her small kitchen table, the morning light streaming through worn curtains, illuminating the stack of papers that threatened to destroy everything. "He's lying," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Everything he's saying is a lie." Ted stood by the counter, his massive frame casting a shadow across the linoleum floor. His jaw clenched as he watched Clara's shoulders slump further with each paragraph she read. "Says here I'm emotionally unstable," Clara continued, her voice barely audible. "That I can't provide a stable home environment." She pushed the papers away, unable to read any more. "He's using the store incident against me, just like we feared." "Let me see that." Ted's gravelly voice was gentle as he reached for the documents. His weathered hands, covered in old engine grease stains that never quite washed away, carefully lifted the papers. Lily was at school, thankfully spared from seeing her mother's distress. Clara stood up, pacing the small kitchen, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. What if the judge believes him? What if— "Stop!" Ted set the papers down firmly. That's exactly what he wants. He's trying to get in your head, make you doubt yourself. Clara ran her fingers through her hair, tugging at the ends in frustration. But look at me, Ted. I'm living in this tiny apartment, barely making ends meet. Meanwhile, he has that big house, that fancy job. A house and money don't make a good parent? Ted interrupted, his voice firm but kind. You know that better than anyone. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes. The judge won't see it that way. All they'll see is what's on paper, a struggling single mom versus a successful businessman. Ted moved closer, his presence steady and reassuring. No. They'll see a mother who moved heaven and earth to protect her daughter, who works 2 jobs to keep food on the table, who never misses a school event, who helps with homework every night. Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But these accusations? He's making me sound crazy, unstable. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with you and Lily can see the truth, Ted insisted. Your lawyer's got character witnesses lined up. Hell, even that store manager agreed to testify that it was all just a misunderstanding. Clara looked up at him, her eyes red but determined. You really think we can fight this? We're not just going to fight it, Ted said, his voice carrying the same quiet strength that had first drawn Clara to trust him. We're going to win, because unlike him, we've got something worth fighting for. He picked up the court documents, arranging them neatly. Now, let's go through these one by one. We'll prepare responses to every single accusation. By tomorrow, you'll be ready for anything he throws at you. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. The fear was still there, churning in her stomach, but Ted's presence made it feel manageable. She sat back down at the table, pulling out a notepad. Okay, she said, her voice stronger. Where do we start? Ted smiled slightly, that rare expression that transformed his intimidating features into something almost gentle. That's the Clara I know. We start at the beginning, and we don't stop until we've turned every one of his lies into proof of your strength. They spent the next few hours preparing, Ted's steady voice helping Clara find the truth behind each accusation, turning her ex-husband's weapons into shields. Though tomorrow loomed dark and uncertain, Clara felt something she hadn't expected. Hope, small but stubborn, like a flame refusing to go out. The neon sign of Jake's bar flickered in the late afternoon sun, casting an eerie red glow across the nearly empty parking lot. Ted's motorcycle stood alone, except for a sleek black Harley parked nearby. He recognized that bike, customized with chrome skulls and blood-red paint. It belonged to Snake, his old rival from the days when territory wars between motorcycle clubs turned deadly. Ted pushed open the heavy wooden door, the familiar smell of stale beer and cigarettes hitting him. At the far end of the bar, Snake sat waiting, his leather vest decorated with patches that told stories of violence Ted would rather forget. Well, well, Snake drawled, lifting his beer. If it ain't Big Bear himself. The nickname carried a mocking tone now. Heard you've gone soft, playing guardian angel to some woman and her kid. Ted's jaw tightened as he approached, but he kept his movements measured, controlled. He'd learned long ago that showing fear or anger only gave men like Snake more power. What do you want? Ted's voice was low, gravelly. Snake's thin lips curved into a cruel smile. Just wondering if your new friend knows about Tucson. He paused, letting the word hang in the air like smoke. About what really happened that night. Ted's hands clenched involuntarily. Tucson. A name he'd tried to bury deep in his past, along with the memories of what he'd done there. That's ancient history, Ted said, his voice steady despite the churning in his gut. Is it? Snake leaned forward, his eyes glinting. Wonder what that pretty little single mom would think if she knew the truth about her knight in shining armor. About the blood on his hands? Ted felt the old rage rising, the familiar urge to solve problems with his fists. It would be so easy to fall back into that pattern, to be the man he used to be. Think she'd still trust you around her kid? Snake continued, twisting the knife deeper. Once she knows what kind of monster you really are? The word monster echoed in Ted's mind. How many times had he called himself that, lying awake at night with the weight of his past pressing down on him? You're going to stay away from Clara and Lily, Ted said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Snake stood up, moving into Ted's space. Or what? You'll add another sin to your collection? He smirked. Face it, Bear. Men like us don't change. We just get better at pretending. Ted looked at his reflection in the mirror behind the bar. He saw the tattoos, the scars, the hard lines that years of violence had etched into his face. But he also saw something else, something that hadn't been there in Tucson. Purpose. Hope. You're wrong, Ted said quietly. Men like us can change. We just have to want it bad enough. Snake's face darkened. You really believe that? That you can just wash away all the things you've done? No, Ted replied, meeting Snake's gaze steadily. I can't wash it away, but I can choose to be better, to do better. The truth of those words settled into Ted's bones. His past would always be there, like a shadow he couldn't shake. But it didn't have to control his future. It didn't have to stop him from helping Clara and Lily. Go ahead, Ted said, straightening to his full height. Tell Clara whatever you want about Tucson, about who I used to be. He took a step closer to Snake, his voice firm. But know this, if you try to hurt them, if you do anything to interfere with that custody case, the man I used to be, he'll look tame compared to what you'll face. The fluorescent lights of the courthouse waiting room buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the worn wooden benches. Ted sat with his back straight, his large frame taking up most of the space on the bench. Next to him, Clara fidgeted with the button on her blazer sleeve, her fingers trembling slightly. Lily sat between them, her small hand clutching her mother's, while her other hand held tight to the motorcycle club coin Ted had given Clara that day in the department store. The little girl had polished it until it gleamed, and now it served as her good luck charm. Your Honor will be ready for you in 15 minutes, the court clerk announced, peering over her glasses at them. Clara's breath hitched. Ted noticed her shoulders tense, and he leaned forward slightly, his voice low and steady. Remember what the lawyer said. Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do. She nodded, but her face had gone pale. What if he brings up the store incident? What if— Mom, Lily interrupted, squeezing her hand. You're doing that thing again where you worry too much. Her innocent observation brought a slight smile to Clara's face. Ted watched their interaction, feeling a familiar ache in his chest. He'd seen too many families torn apart in his life, some by his own actions in the past. But this time was different. This time he was fighting to keep one together. The courthouse hallway gradually filled with more people. Lawyers in pressed suits, court officers maintaining order, and other families waiting for their own moments of truth. Ted noticed how some people stared at his tattoos, visible even under his dress shirt, but he kept his focus on Clara and Lily. Ms. Rodriguez? Their lawyer approached, carrying a leather briefcase. She was young, but carried herself with confidence. I've reviewed everything one last time. We have a strong case. Clara straightened her spine, trying to match the lawyer's professional demeanor. Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Ted observed the other people in the waiting room, his old instincts still sharp. He spotted Clara's ex-husband's lawyer first, an expensive-looking man in a tailored suit who kept checking his gold watch. Then he saw him, Robert Rodriguez, Clara's ex, striding down the hallway like he owned it. Lily's grip on her mother's hand tightened. Ted noticed how the little girl seemed to shrink into herself, and something in his chest hardened. He'd seen that look before, the look of a child afraid of their own parent. Clara took a deep breath and stood up, smoothing down her modest dress. Ted could see her trying to gather her strength, to be the mother Lily needed. He stood too, his presence like a protective wall behind them. "The Reynolds case is now concluded," a voice announced from the courtroom. "Rodriguez versus Rodriguez, please prepare to enter." The double doors of courtroom C looked massive and imposing. Clara's lawyer gestured for them to line up. Ted watched as Clara knelt down to Lily's level, straightening the girl's dress collar. "Remember what we talked about, sweetie? You're going to go with Ms. Martinez from Child Services for a little while, okay?" Lily nodded bravely, though her lower lip trembled. "I love you, Mommy." "I love you too, baby. So much." A court officer opened the heavy wooden doors. The sound echoed through the hallway like a thunderclap. Clara stood up, squared her shoulders, and took her first step toward the courtroom. Ted followed, his presence steady and unwavering. Robert Rodriguez entered from the other side, his expensive suit and confident smirk a stark contrast to Clara's humble dignity. But as Ted took his seat in the gallery, he noticed something in the judge's initial glance. A flicker of recognition when she looked at Clara's determined face. Maybe, just maybe, the tide was about to turn. The courtroom felt smaller than Ted expected, with its dark wood panels and American flag standing sentinel beside the judge's bench. He sat rigid in his seat, his weathered hands clasped together, watching as Robert Rodriguez's lawyer presented their case. "Your Honor," the expensive lawyer said, his voice dripping with rehearsed concern. "Ms. Rodriguez has shown a pattern of instability. Just last month there was an incident at Carlton's department store involving her daughter and security personnel." Clara's shoulders tensed. Ted could see her fighting to keep her composure as her ex-husband's lawyer continued painting a picture of her that was so far from the truth, it made his blood boil. Robert sat at his table, looking smug in his designer suit. He kept shooting superior glances at Clara, who stared straight ahead, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. "Furthermore," the lawyer continued, "Ms. Rodriguez's financial situation is precarious at best. She's moved 3 times in the past year, and—" "Objection, Your Honor," Clara's lawyer interrupted. "Counsel is attempting to use my client's economic circumstances against her, which is not grounds for determining custody." "Sustained," the judge said, her stern gaze fixed on Robert's lawyer. The morning dragged on, with Robert taking the stand to describe how he could provide Lily with a stable, proper home. Ted watched Clara's face grow paler with each word, though she never dropped her dignified posture. When Clara's turn came, she spoke softly but clearly about her love for Lily, about their daily routines, about helping with homework, and making sure Lily never missed a doctor's appointment. Ted could see the judge paying close attention, noting how Clara's voice grew stronger when she talked about her daughter. Then came the moment that changed everything. "Your Honor," Clara's lawyer said, "I'd like to call Theodore Martin to the stand." Ted's heart jumped, but he kept his face neutral as he stood. He felt every eye in the courtroom follow him as he made his way to the witness stand. His boots echoed on the polished floor, and he was acutely aware of how out of place he must look, a tattooed biker in a courthouse full of suits. After being sworn in, Ted settled into the chair, which creaked under his weight. Clara's lawyer approached him with a gentle smile. "Mr. Martin, could you tell the court how you know Ms. Rodriguez?" Ted cleared his throat, his deep voice filling the quiet room. "I met Clara and Lily at Carlton's department store during the incident that's been mentioned." He looked directly at the judge. "But what hasn't been mentioned is that I found Clara in that store trying to comfort her daughter, who was upset about accidentally setting off a security alarm. And what has been your impression of Ms. Rodriguez as a mother? Ted sat up straighter. In all my years, I've never seen anyone fight harder for their child. Clara works 2 jobs, but she still makes time to read to Lily every night. She skips meals sometimes so Lily can have enough to eat. When Lily had the flu last month, Clara stayed up for 3 nights straight, holding her daughter's hand. He paused, his voice growing more passionate. I've seen Clara at her lowest moments, Your Honor, and even then, her first thought is always Lily, always. She's not perfect, none of us are, but she loves that little girl more than anything in this world. Robert's lawyer stood up, objecting, but Ted's words had already filled the courtroom. The judge's expression had softened slightly, and even some of the court officers were nodding unconsciously. Robert Rodriguez's face had turned an angry shade of red. He leaned over to whisper something harsh to his lawyer, who tried to quiet him with a raised hand. The expensive suit he wore seemed to constrain him now as he fidgeted in his chair, tugging at his collar. Ted's testimony continued, his deep voice steady and sure. I've seen what fear looks like in people's eyes, he said, glancing briefly at Robert. And I've seen what strength looks like, too. Clara's got more strength in her little finger than most folks have in their whole body. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, studied Ted carefully. Her expression had softened from its earlier stern mask, and she nodded slightly as Ted spoke about Clara's dedication to her daughter. And the incident at the department store, Ted continued, that wasn't about theft or bad parenting. That was about a little girl who got excited about a toy, and a mother who was doing her best during a tough time. Robert suddenly stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous, he burst out. You're going to listen to this biker? Look at him. Mr. Rodriguez, the judge's voice cracked like a whip. Sit down immediately, or I will hold you in contempt. Clara watched as her ex-husband slowly sank back into his chair, his face twisted with fury. She'd seen that expression before, in their old house, when things got bad. But this time, she wasn't alone. The judge removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She'd been taking notes throughout Ted's testimony, her pen moving steadily across the legal pad. Now she looked up, scanning the courtroom with keen eyes that seemed to take in everything. Mr. Martin, she said, thank you for your testimony. You may step down. Ted returned to his seat beside Clara. Under the table, Clara's hands were twisted together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She'd barely breathed during Ted's testimony, afraid to break the spell his words had cast over the courtroom. The judge shuffled some papers on her bench, then looked at her watch. Given the testimony we've heard today, I believe we should take a brief recess before proceeding. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. As people began to stand and move around, Ted leaned closer to Clara. Hey, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. You're doing great. The judge sees it. She sees who you really are. Clara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You think so? I know so, Ted replied, his weathered face creasing into a gentle smile. Did you see your ex's face? He knows he's losing control. The judge isn't buying his act. Clara took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. Through the courtroom windows, she could see patches of blue sky between the clouds. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt something other than fear, something that felt a lot like hope. Ted's solid presence beside her was like an anchor, keeping her grounded when everything else felt like it might float away. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching as the bailiff escorted Robert and his lawyer from the courtroom, waiting for the next chapter of their story to unfold. The 15-minute recess felt like hours. Clara sat rigid in her chair, her shoulders tense as stone. The courtroom slowly refilled, the sound of shuffling feet and quiet murmurs filling the air. Robert strode back in with his lawyer, his jaw set in a hard line. Ted's large hand covered Clara's trembling fingers. The warmth of his touch helped steady her racing heart, if only a little. She looked down at their joined hands, his weathered and scarred, hers small and pale in comparison. "All rise," the bailiff called out as Judge Henderson returned to the courtroom. Clara stood on shaky legs. Ted rose beside her, a solid mountain of quiet strength. Lily sat in the back of the courtroom with Clara's sister, watching with wide, nervous eyes. Judge Henderson settled into her chair and adjusted her glasses. The rustling of papers seemed deafening in the hushed courtroom. Clara could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence presented, Judge Henderson began, her voice clear and measured, "I am prepared to render my decision regarding the custody of Lily Rodriguez." Clara's fingers tightened around Ted's hand. He squeezed back gently. "This court has heard compelling testimony from multiple witnesses regarding both parents' ability to care for the child in question." The judge's eyes swept across the courtroom, pausing briefly on Robert before settling on Clara. "Mr. Rodriguez has presented arguments regarding financial stability and his ability to provide material comfort for his daughter." Robert straightened in his chair, a smug smile starting to form on his face. "However," Judge Henderson continued, "this court must consider more than just financial means when determining the best interests of the child." She shuffled through her notes. "We have heard substantial testimony regarding Ms. Rodriguez's dedication to her daughter's well-being, despite facing significant challenges." Clara held her breath. The judge's expression remained neutral as she spoke. "The testimony of Mr. Martin was particularly illuminating," Judge Henderson said, "not only regarding Ms. Rodriguez's character, but also in demonstrating the support system she has developed, a crucial factor in providing a stable environment for a child." Ted stood perfectly still, his presence steady and reassuring beside Clara. Furthermore, the court cannot ignore the documented history of domestic incidents during the marriage, nor Mr. Rodriguez's concerning behavior during these proceedings. The judge's tone grew firmer. "The outbursts witnessed in this very courtroom today only serve to reinforce the concerns raised about Mr. Rodriguez's temperament." Robert's face darkened. His lawyer placed a warning hand on his arm. Judge Henderson sat up straighter, her voice taking on an official tone. "Therefore, it is the finding of this court that the best interests of the child will be served by granting full custody to Clara Rodriguez, with Mr. Rodriguez to have supervised visitation rights to be determined at a later date." The words hit Clara like a wave. Her knees weakened, and tears spilled down her cheeks. Ted's arm went around her shoulders, supporting her as the judge continued reading the specifics of the custody arrangement. Through her tears, Clara saw Lily break into a huge smile in the back of the courtroom. Her daughter's joy was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds, warming her from the inside out. Robert stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, but Clara barely noticed. All she could feel was overwhelming relief and gratitude. She turned to Ted, who was smiling down at her, his eyes crinkled at the corners. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words felt inadequate for everything he'd done. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse parking lot as Ted walked beside Clara and Lily. His heavy boots echoed against the pavement, matching the rhythm of Lily's skipping steps. The little girl hadn't stopped smiling since the judge's decision, her hand wrapped tightly in her mother's. "I still can't believe it's over," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. She'd been crying on and off since they left the courtroom, happy tears that made her eyes shine. "Ted, I don't know how to thank you enough." Ted shrugged his broad shoulders, uncomfortable with the praise. The leather of his jacket creaked as he moved. "You don't need to thank me," he said gruffly. "You did all the hard work. I just showed up." "No." Clara stopped walking and turned to face him. "You did so much more than that. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You gave us hope when everything seemed hopeless." Lily nodded eagerly. "Yeah, Mr. Ted, you're like our guardian angel except with tattoos and a motorcycle." A deep chuckle rumbled in Ted's chest. The description struck him as funny. Him? An angel. If only his old motorcycle club brothers could hear that one. But looking at Lily's innocent face and Clara's grateful smile, he felt something shift inside him, like puzzle pieces finally falling into place. They reached Clara's old Honda Civic. Its blue paint faded from years in the sun. Ted watched as Clara helped Lily into the back seat, making sure her seatbelt was secure. It was such a simple moment, but it held all the weight of what they'd fought for, a mother's right to take care of her child. "You know," Ted said, his voice softer than usual, "I spent a lot of years thinking I had to be tough to be strong. Thought being feared meant being respected." He ran a hand through his graying beard. "Took me too long to figure out that real strength is something else entirely." Clara tilted her head, studying him. "What do you mean?" "Watching you these past few weeks, fighting for Lily, never giving up even when things looked bad. That's real strength." Ted gestured towards the courthouse behind them. "In there, you showed more courage than I ever did in all my years with the club." Clara's eyes welled up with fresh tears. She stepped forward and, before Ted could react, wrapped her arms around his middle in a tight hug. Ted stood frozen for a moment, then carefully returned the embrace, patting her back awkwardly. "You're a good man, Ted Martin," Clara said, stepping back and wiping her eyes. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Ted felt his throat tighten. He'd been called many things in his life, most of them not fit to repeat in front of Lily, but good hadn't been one of them. Not until now. Clara opened her car door and slid behind the wheel. Lily waved enthusiastically from the back seat. "Bye, Mr. Ted. Thank you for helping my mommy." Ted raised his hand in response, a small smile tugging at his lips. He watched as Clara started the engine and carefully backed out of the parking space. As they pulled away, he saw Lily turn in her seat to keep waving until they disappeared around the corner. Standing there in the parking lot, Ted felt lighter than he had in years. The weight of his past, which had hung so heavy on his shoulders for so long, seemed to lift a little. He wasn't just the tough guy from the motorcycle club anymore. He wasn't defined by his mistakes or his rough reputation. Clara stood in the doorway of her new apartment, cardboard box balanced on her hip. Sunlight streamed through the small window, warming the worn wooden floors. It wasn't much, just a two-bedroom unit in a modest complex, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it was hers. "Mommy, where should I put my books?" Lily called from her new room, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "Just leave them in the box for now, sweetie. We'll get your bookshelf set up tonight." Clara set down her own box in the kitchen, running her hand along the counter. The laminate was old but spotless, and the cabinets had been freshly painted a cheerful yellow. Her new job at the medical billing office started next week. The pay wasn't extraordinary, but it was steady, with benefits and regular hours. No more juggling multiple part-time positions or missing Lily's school events. The thought made her smile. The sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway made her turn. Ted appeared in the doorway, carrying a small kitchen table he'd found at a second-hand store. His massive frame made the furniture look like dollhouse pieces. "Where do you want this?" he asked, his voice gruff but gentle. "Over by the window, please." Clara pointed to the sunny breakfast nook. "Are you sure you don't mind helping us move? It's Saturday. I'm sure you have better things to do." Ted set the table down carefully. "Nah, shop's closed today anyway." He straightened up, rolling his shoulders. The leather of his vest creaked with the movement. "Besides, somebody's got to make sure you don't try carrying that couch up here by yourself." Clara laughed, remembering how she'd insisted she could handle the furniture alone. "I've learned my lesson about being too proud to accept help." Lily bounded out of her room, her dark braids bouncing. "Mr. Ted, want to see my new room? It has a window seat." "Sure thing, kid." Ted let himself be pulled along by the excited 8-year-old, ducking his head to fit through the doorway. Clara watched them go, her heart full. These past few months had changed everything. The custody battle was over. Her ex-husband had moved to another state, and she was finally standing on her own 2 feet. Yet she knew she hadn't done it alone. Later, after Lily had fallen asleep on a pile of moving blankets, Clara and Ted sat on the floor of the living room, sharing coffee from paper cups. "It's not much," Clara said, looking around at the half-unpacked boxes and mismatched furniture. "But it feels like home already." Ted nodded, his large hands wrapped around the small cup. "You've done good, Clara. Real good." "We've all come a long way since that day in the department store," she said softly. "I never thought a complete stranger would end up being such an important part of our lives." Ted shifted, uncomfortable with the sentiment, but pleased all the same. "Yeah, well, sometimes life surprises you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the walls orange through the bare windows. Clara felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. This wasn't just a new apartment or a new job. It was a fresh start, built on the foundation of unexpected friendship and newfound strength. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing Ted would understand everything she meant by those 2 words. He just nodded, a small smile hidden in his beard, and took another sip of his coffee. Clara sat at her small kitchen table, morning sunlight streaming through the curtains she'd sewn herself. A cup of coffee steamed beside her as she smoothed out a piece of stationery. The apartment was quiet. Lily had already left for summer camp, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts. She picked up her pen and began to write. "Dear Ted, it's hard to believe a year has passed since we moved into our new place. So much has changed, and I wanted to take a moment to share our joy with you. Remember how worried I was about Lily adjusting to her new school? Well, yesterday was her elementary school graduation, and you should have seen her. She stood up there on stage, giving her speech as class representative, looking so grown up in her new dress. She wasn't even nervous. The principal specifically mentioned how she's one of their brightest students. I wish you could have been there to see her shine. Our little apartment has become a real home. Those second-hand furniture pieces you helped us move in? We've painted them in bright colors, and Lily decorated her bookshelf with all the stickers you gave her. That kitchen table where we shared our first meal here has hosted countless homework sessions, art projects, and family dinners. I'm doing well at work, too. They promoted me to senior billing coordinator last month. It's not just a job anymore, it's become a career. For the first time in my life, I feel financially stable. We even started a small savings account for Lily's college fund. But more than all these achievements, I want you to know how much your friendship changed our lives. That day in the department store, when everything seemed to be falling apart, you didn't just help a crying woman in a bathroom. You gave us hope. Your strength during the custody battle, your quiet support during our darkest moments, and your unwavering belief in us made all the difference. Lily still keeps that motorcycle club coin you gave me. She says it's her lucky charm, though I've told her 100 times it's not the coin that's lucky. It's the good people in our lives who make the difference. I know you're not one for emotional speeches or grand gestures, but I needed to tell you. You were my hero when I needed one. I'll never forget that. With endless gratitude, Clara and Lily P.S. I've enclosed some photos from Lily's graduation. The one where she's making that silly face? She said that one's especially for you. Clara sealed the envelope, adding the photos she'd mentioned. She smiled, remembering how Ted had always been able to make Lily laugh, even during the toughest times. Across town, Ted was working in his motorcycle shop when the mail arrived. He recognized Clara's neat handwriting immediately and set down his tools, wiping his hands on a shop rag. Finding a quiet corner, he opened the letter carefully. As he read, his weathered face softened. He studied each photo, lingering on the one of Lily making her speech, standing tall and confident. Pride swelled in his chest, remembering the shy, frightened little girl who had first approached him in the store. When he reached the part about being their hero, Ted had to clear his throat, blinking rapidly. He'd never set out to be anyone's hero. He'd just done what felt right. But seeing how far they'd come, knowing he'd played a part in their journey, filled him with a joy he couldn't quite describe. Carefully folding the letter, Ted tucked it into his leather jacket pocket, right next to his heart. The photos he would frame later, adding them to the small collection in his office. For now, he just sat there, smiling, grateful that life had given him the chance to make a difference. Ted's motorcycle rumbled to a stop in front of a modest two-story apartment building. The flower boxes on the windows and the neatly swept walkway made it feel welcoming, a far cry from the rundown places Clara and Lily used to live in. He smiled, noticing Lily's bike chained to the rack near the entrance, decorated with colorful streamers. Before he could even knock, the door flew open. "Ted!" Lily bounced on her toes, her face lighting up at the sight of him. At 8 years old, she'd grown taller since he'd first met her, but her eyes still held that same sparkle of innocence. "Hey there, kiddo." Ted's gruff voice softened as he reached down to ruffle her hair. She grabbed his hand and pulled him inside with surprising strength. "Mom, Ted's here," Lily called out, leading him through their small living room. The space was warm and lived in, with family photos on the walls and Lily's artwork proudly displayed on the refrigerator. A stack of school books sat on the coffee table next to a half-finished puzzle. Clara emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her face looked different now, relaxed, happy. The constant worry lines that had once creased her forehead had softened. "Ted? I wasn't expecting you today." "Just thought I'd stop by," he said, holding up a paper bag. "Brought those cookies Lily likes from the bakery near my shop." "The ones with chocolate chips?" Lily's eyes widened. At Clara's nod of approval, she snatched the bag and hurried to the kitchen to get a plate. Clara gestured for Ted to sit on their well-worn but comfortable couch. "The place looks good," he commented, noting the new curtains and the small potted plants that gave the room life. "It feels like home now," Clara said softly. "We've been here 6 months, and I still can't believe it sometimes." She watched Lily arranging cookies on a plate in the kitchen. "She's doing so well in school, her teacher says she might skip a grade." Ted nodded, his chest swelling with pride. "Smart kid." "None of this would have happened without you, Ted." Clara's voice wavered slightly. "The lawyer you found us, the moving help, everything." "You did all the hard work," Ted interrupted gruffly, uncomfortable with praise as always. "I just pointed you in the right direction." Lily returned with the cookies and settled between them on the couch. "Want to see my science project? I got an A+." Without waiting for an answer, she dashed to her room. Clara laughed, the sound free and genuine. She's been wanting to show you that for weeks. She says you're the only one who'll understand the mechanical parts she included." Ted looked around the room again, taking in all the little details that spoke of stability and peace. Lily's school schedule on the fridge, a family calendar marked with activities, fresh flowers in a vase on the windowsill. The fear and uncertainty that had haunted Clara's eyes when he first met her were gone, replaced by confidence and contentment. As Lily rushed back with her project, chattering excitedly about gears and levers, Ted felt a deep satisfaction settle in his chest. Here, in this small apartment filled with warmth and laughter, was proof that sometimes all it took was one person believing in another to change everything. Ted sat astride his Harley-Davidson, the engine quietly idling beneath him as he watched the sun sink lower in the sky. The parking lot of his motorcycle repair shop was empty now, tools cleaned and put away, the day's work complete. Golden light painted everything in warm hues, making even the old oil stains on the concrete look almost beautiful. He pulled out Clara's letter from his jacket pocket, the paper now worn soft at the creases from being read so many times. The words, "You were my hero," caught the fading sunlight. Ted shook his head, a small smile tugging at his bearded face. Hero wasn't a word he'd ever thought would apply to him. The sunset reminded him of another evening, years ago, when he'd stood in a different parking lot watching police lights flash against store windows. That day, seeing Clara broken and afraid, something had shifted inside him. The man he'd been, the enforcer, the intimidator, suddenly seemed like a stranger. Running his calloused fingers over the motorcycle's handlebar, Ted remembered countless nights spent racing through these same streets, anger and violence, his only companions. The tattoos on his arms told stories of those days, stories of brotherhood twisted by darkness, of power that came at too high a price. But now, those same hands had helped carry boxes into Clara's new apartment, had high-fived Lily after her science fair victory, had written checks for legal fees instead of paying protection money. The transformation felt both sudden and gradual, like watching a sunrise. You couldn't pinpoint the exact moment darkness turned to light, but you knew when it had happened. Ted reached into his saddlebag and pulled out his old Hell's Angels vest. The leather was cracked and faded, the patches telling tales of a life he'd left behind. He hadn't worn it since the day of the custody hearing, when he'd chosen to face the judge as himself, just Ted Martin, a man trying to do the right thing. The rival club members' threats echoed in his memory, but they seemed hollow now. His past would always be there, like the tattoos on his skin, but it no longer had power over him. He'd found something stronger than fear or intimidation, the simple act of helping others. Clara and Lily's transformation had changed him too. Watching them grow stronger, seeing them build a new life, had shown him that change was possible. Their victory had become his victory, their peace, his peace. The setting sun painted the clouds in brilliant oranges and pinks, like nature's own celebration. Ted tucked the letter back into his jacket, close to his heart where it belonged. He kicked the motorcycle's stand up, feeling the familiar rumble of the engine strengthen beneath him. For years, he'd carried the weight of his past like armor, using it to keep people at a distance. Now that weight was lifting. Each good deed, each small kindness, had chipped away at it until he could finally see the man he'd become. Not perfect, but trying, always trying to be better. Ted revved the engine, ready to head home. The horizon stretched before him, painted in the colors of possibility. The same roads that had once led him into darkness now seemed to offer something different. A path forward. A chance to keep making a difference. One small act of kindness at a time. As he prepared to ride off into the sunset, Ted felt lighter than he had in years. The chains of his past no longer bound him. For the first time in his life, he was truly free. Not because he'd escaped his history, but because he'd found a way to turn it into something meaningful. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.